You know, there is something quite extraordinary that happens the moment you decide to choose yourself, not in the way the world teaches us to choose ourselves, with all that grasping and accumulation and endless striving for more. No, I mean something altogether different. I mean that quiet, almost imperceptible moment when you finally stop betraying your own soul. Most people never experience this moment. They live their entire lives as strangers to themselves, carrying out the expectations of others, fulfilling roles that were written for them before they could even speak. They wake each morning and put on the mask that society demands, and by evening they have forgotten there was ever a face beneath it. This is not living. This is a kind of sleepwalking that we have mistaken for consciousness. I have spent decades observing the human psyche, watching how we construct these elaborate prisons of conformity, and then wonder why we feel so empty, so disconnected from any sense of meaning or purpose. We blame our circumstances, our relationships, our lack of opportunity. But the truth is far more unsettling. The prison is not built by others. We are both the architect and the prisoner. Let me tell you what I have discovered. When you truly choose yourself, when you finally decide to honor what is deepest and most authentic within you, everything does indeed change. But not in the way you might expect. Not with fanfare or celebration or the approval of those around you. Often, it begins with a kind of quiet revolution that no one else can see. The first thing that changes is your relationship to fear. You see, most of our lives are governed by a terror we rarely acknowledge. The terror of being rejected, of being seen as different, of standing alone. We make countless small compromises with this fear, little bargains where we trade pieces of our authentic self for the illusion of safety and acceptance. We laugh at jokes we do not find amusing. We pursue careers that drain our spirit. We remain in relationships that slowly suffocate what is most alive within us. But when you choose yourself, you begin to understand that this fear is not protecting you. It is destroying you. Slowly, systematically, day by day. The very thing you thought would keep you safe is actually the source of your deepest suffering. Because every time you abandon yourself to please others, every time you silence your inner voice to maintain peace, you create a split in your being. Part of you knows the truth, but another part must pretend not to know it. This division within the self is what I have come to understand as the root of much human misery. We become strangers to ourselves, actors in a play we never auditioned for, speaking lines that feel foreign in our mouths. And the tragedy is that we do this so gradually, so unconsciously, that we often do not realize what we have lost until it is almost too late. I remember a patient who came to me many years ago, a man in his 50s who had built what appeared to be a successful life, respected in his profession, married to a suitable woman, father to obedient children. Yet he sat in my office with tears streaming down his face, telling me that he felt as though he were disappearing. "I cannot find myself anywhere," he said. "I look in the mirror and see a stranger. I listen to my own voice and it sounds like someone else speaking." This man had spent decades choosing everyone but himself. He had molded his personality to fit what others expected, shaped his dreams to match what others approved of, buried his true desires so deeply that he could no longer remember what they were. And now, in middle age, he was experiencing what I might call a crisis of authenticity. His unconscious was rebelling against the false life he had constructed. This is what happens when we refuse to choose ourselves. The parts of us that we deny, that we push into the shadows, they do not simply disappear. They gather strength in the darkness. They send us dreams and symptoms and inexplicable longings. They create depression and anxiety and that terrible sense of emptiness that so many people carry. The psyche will not be fooled indefinitely. It knows when we are living a lie, even when our conscious mind has convinced itself otherwise. But here is what I find most remarkable. The moment this man began to choose himself, to honor what was true within him rather than what was expected of him, everything began to shift. Not easily, you understand. There was resistance from those around him who had grown comfortable with the role he had been playing. There was fear as he stepped into unknown territory. There was grief as he mourned the years he had spent living as someone else. Yet beneath all of this difficulty, something extraordinary was happening. He was coming alive. Colors seemed brighter, food tasted more vivid. He could feel his own heartbeat in a way he had not since childhood. He was remembering what it felt like to be himself. This is the great paradox of choosing yourself. It requires you to disappoint others. It demands that you step away from the collective sleep and risk standing alone. It asks you to trust something within yourself that you may have ignored for decades. And yet, it is only through this apparent selfishness that you can become genuinely useful to the world. You see, when you are living authentically, when you are aligned with your deepest truth, you stop being a burden on others. You stop needing them to validate your existence or affirm your choices. You stop projecting your unlived life onto them or expecting them to fulfill dreams you have been too afraid to pursue yourself. In choosing yourself, you actually free others to be themselves as well. But let me be clear about what I mean by choosing yourself. I am not advocating for narcissism or selfishness in the ordinary sense. I am not suggesting that you disregard the needs of others or pursue your desires without consideration for their impact. What I am describing is something far more subtle and far more profound. To choose yourself means to choose consciousness over unconsciousness. It means to choose truth over comfort. It means to choose growth over stagnation, even when growth is painful. It means to face the parts of yourself that you would rather deny, to acknowledge the shadow aspects of your personality that you have been projecting onto others. This is difficult work. Perhaps the most difficult work a human being can undertake, because it requires you to take responsibility not just for your actions, but for your inner life, your emotions, your reactions, your patterns of thought and behavior. It requires you to stop blaming others for your unhappiness and to begin the slow, painstaking process of understanding how you have participated in creating your own suffering. When you choose yourself in this way, you begin to see how much of your life has been spent in reaction, reacting to your parents' expectations, your society's demands, your own fears and insecurities. You begin to understand how rarely you have acted from a place of genuine choice, how often you have simply been carried along by forces you did not even recognize. But consciousness brings choice, and choice brings the possibility of transformation. When you are no longer unconsciously driven by the need for approval or the fear of rejection, when you are no longer compulsively trying to prove your worth or hide your flaws, space opens up. Space for creativity, for authentic relationship, for genuine contribution to the world. I have seen this transformation countless times in my work with patients, and I have experienced it in my own life. There comes a moment when you realize that you have been living in a kind of exile from yourself, and you make the decision to come home, not to the home others have built for you, but to the home that exists within, your own being. This homecoming is not a destination, but a process. It requires constant vigilance, constant choice, because the forces that pulled you away from yourself in the first place, they do not simply disappear. The need for approval, the fear of judgment, the desire to fit in, these are powerful currents that will continue to exert their influence throughout your life. But once you have tasted authenticity, once you have experienced what it feels like to live in alignment with your deepest truth, you can never fully go back to unconsciousness. You may slip back into old patterns, you may find yourself compromising in ways you thought you had outgrown, but there will always be something within you that remembers, something that calls you back to yourself, something within you that recognizes the difference between living and merely existing. And this recognition, once awakened, becomes your compass, your guide back to authenticity. Whenever you find yourself drifting into the old patterns of self-abandonment. The second thing that changes when you choose yourself is your relationship to solitude. Most people fear being alone because they have never learned to distinguish between loneliness and aloneness. Loneliness is what you feel when you are disconnected from yourself. It is a hunger that no amount of company can satisfy because the person you most need to be with you have abandoned. But aloneness, true aloneness, this is something entirely different. When you choose yourself, solitude becomes not an empty space to be filled, but a fertile ground in which your authentic self can finally breathe and grow. You begin to understand that you cannot know who you truly are while constantly absorbing the opinions, expectations, and emotional states of others. You realize that the voice of your own soul can only be heard in the quiet spaces between the noise of the world. I have observed that many people fill their lives with constant activity, constant stimulation, constant company. Not because they enjoy these things, but because they are terrified of what they might discover in the silence. They fear that if they stop moving, stop performing, stop proving their worth, they will find nothing there. But this fear is based on a fundamental misunderstanding. The emptiness they fear is not the emptiness of having nothing within themselves. It is the emptiness that comes from having filled themselves with everything except themselves. It is the hollow feeling that results from living someone else's life, from pursuing someone else's dreams, from becoming someone else's version of who you should be. When you choose yourself and enter into genuine solitude, you do not find emptiness. You find presence. You discover that beneath all the roles you have been playing, beneath all the masks you have been wearing, there is someone there. Someone who has been waiting patiently for you to remember them, to acknowledge them, to finally come home. This discovery is both exhilarating and terrifying. Exhilarating because you realize you are not lost, you are not nothing, you have not disappeared entirely beneath the weight of others' expectations. Terrifying because you understand how much of your life you have spent in exile from this essential self, how many years you have wasted trying to be someone you were never meant to be. But terror and exhilaration often walk hand in hand when we are touching something real, something alive, something that matters. The psyche knows when we are approaching truth, and it responds with intensity because truth has power. Truth has the power to shatter illusions, to break open prisons we did not even know we were living in, to set us free in ways we never imagined possible. The third transformation that occurs when you choose yourself is perhaps the most profound of all. Your relationship to other people begins to change, not because you care less about them, but because you care differently. When you are living authentically, when you are aligned with your own truth, you stop needing others to be different than they are. You stop trying to fix them, change them, control them, or manipulate them into giving you what you think you need. This is a remarkable shift. Most of our relationships, if we are honest, contain elements of unconscious bargaining. We give affection in exchange for validation. We offer support in hopes of receiving approval. We modify our behavior to earn love, and we withhold aspects of ourselves to avoid rejection. These are not genuine relationships. They are transactions disguised as connections. But when you have found your way back to yourself, when you are no longer dependent on others for your sense of worth or identity, you can finally meet them as they are rather than as you need them to be. You can love them without agenda, support them without expectation, and accept them without trying to change them. This does not mean you become passive or lose your ability to set boundaries. In fact, the opposite is true. When you are centered in your own authenticity, you become much clearer about what you will and will not accept in your relationships. But your boundaries come from a place of self-respect rather than fear, from clarity rather than reactivity. I think of a woman I worked with who had spent her marriage trying to transform her husband into someone he was not. She criticized him constantly, nagged him about his habits, manipulated him with guilt and anger, all in the service of what she believed was love. But it was not love. It was her own unlived life, seeking expression through him. She was trying to make him into the person she was too afraid to become herself. When she began to choose herself, when she started to pursue her own interests and develop her own talents and speak her own truth, something miraculous happened. She stopped needing him to be different. She could finally see him clearly, not as a project to be improved or a disappointment to be endured, but as another human being walking his own path, facing his own struggles, carrying his own gifts and limitations. And in this seeing, something unexpected occurred. He began to change. Not because she was pressuring him to change, but because he was finally free to be himself in her presence. When we stop trying to control others, we often discover that they were only resisting our control, not growth itself. This is one of the great paradoxes of human relationship. The more we try to change someone, the more they resist changing. The more we accept them as they are, the more space we create for them to become who they might be. But this acceptance can only come from a place of inner fullness, not inner emptiness. It can only arise when we have chosen ourselves so completely that we no longer need others to complete us. When you choose yourself, you also begin to attract different people into your life, those who were drawn to your willingness to abandon yourself in service of their needs. They may drift away, but others will appear, people who are also on the path of authenticity, who can meet you in your truth rather than in your performance. These relationships have a different quality altogether. There is less drama because there is less projection. There is more genuine intimacy because there is less fear of being truly seen. There is deeper trust because both people are committed to honesty, first with themselves and then with each other. I have witnessed friendships that lasted decades dissolve when one person chose to become authentic. And I have seen new connections form that were deeper and more nourishing than anything that came before. This can be painful, this shifting of relationships, but it is also necessary. You cannot remain loyal to your false self and expect to experience genuine connection. The fourth change that occurs when you choose yourself is perhaps the most subtle, but also the most significant. Your relationship to suffering transforms. You begin to understand that much of what you have called suffering was actually the pain of self-betrayal, the ache of living in contradiction to your own nature. Human beings will always face difficulty. Life contains loss, disappointment, physical pain, the challenges of aging and mortality. But there is a difference between this unavoidable suffering and the suffering we create through our resistance to ourselves. When you are living authentically, when you are aligned with your deepest truth, you still face the inevitable hardships of human existence, but you face them as yourself, not as someone pretending to be someone else. This makes all the difference. Authentic suffering has meaning. It serves a purpose. It teaches us, deepens us, connects us to the fundamental experiences of being human. But in authentic suffering, the pain that comes from self-abandonment, this serves no one. It simply drains our energy and diminishes our capacity for genuine life. When you choose yourself, you may find that some forms of suffering you thought were inevitable simply disappear. The anxiety that came from constantly trying to predict what others wanted from you, the depression that arose from living a life that felt meaningless, the anger that surfaced when you felt trapped by others' expectations. Much of this dissolves when you return to authenticity. But new forms of difficulty may arise. The challenge of standing alone when everyone else is following the crowd, the weight of making your own decisions rather than simply conforming to what is expected, the responsibility of creating meaning rather than accepting someone else's definition of what your life should be about. Yet this suffering has a different quality. It is the pain of growth rather than the pain of stagnation. It is the discomfort that comes from expanding rather than the ache that comes from shrinking. It is the challenge of becoming rather than the despair of remaining stuck. I have come to understand that the greatest act of courage is not facing external enemies or conquering distant lands. It is the willingness to disappoint those who have never truly known you. When you choose yourself, you must be prepared for the profound discomfort that comes from watching others react to your authenticity as if it were a personal betrayal of them. You see, the people in your life have grown accustomed to a certain version of you. They have become comfortable with your compliance, your willingness to bend, your readiness to sacrifice your own needs for theirs. They may even love this version of you, but it is not love in the truest sense. It is attachment to a role you have been playing, appreciation for a service you have been providing. When you step out of this role, when you begin to honor your own voice above theirs, something very curious happens. Those who claim to care for you may suddenly become angry, hurt, confused. They will say things like, "You have changed," as if change were a crime. They will accuse you of being selfish, as if choosing yourself were somehow morally wrong. They will make you feel guilty for no longer being available to carry their emotional burdens or fulfill their unspoken expectations. This reaction is not really about you. It is about their own relationship to authenticity, their own fear of what it might mean to choose themselves. When they see you living freely, it reminds them of their own imprisonment. When they witness you speaking your truth, it highlights their own silence. Your authenticity becomes a mirror that shows them what they have been too frightened to become. But here is what I have learned through decades of observing human nature. You cannot save others from their own cowardice by remaining small. You cannot protect them from their fear of authenticity by continuing to live inauthentically yourself. In fact, when you choose to remain false in order to keep others comfortable, you rob them of the opportunity to grow, to face their own shadows, to discover what they might become if they too had the courage to choose themselves. I think of the relationship between parent and child, how often parents unconsciously demand that their children remain frozen in roles that serve the parent's emotional needs rather than the child's developmental requirements. The mother who cannot bear to see her daughter become independent because it reminds her of her own unlived independence. The father who discourages his son's sensitivity because he has never learned to honor his own tender heart. When the child chooses authenticity over compliance, when they refuse to carry the parent's unlived life or compensate for the parent's emotional wounds, there is often a crisis. The parent experiences this as rejection, abandonment, ingratitude. But what is really happening is that the child is finally becoming themselves rather than remaining a projection of the parent's unconscious needs. This same pattern repeats itself in friendships, marriages, professional relationships. We become so invested in others playing certain roles that we forget these are human beings with their own souls, their own destinies, their own need to become who they truly are. When they choose authenticity, we feel betrayed, not because they have wronged us, but because they are no longer serving our unconscious agenda. The fifth transformation that occurs when you choose yourself is perhaps the most liberating of all. You begin to understand that you are not responsible for managing other people's emotions. This may sound obvious, but I assure you, it is one of the most revolutionary insights a human being can have. Most of us spend enormous amounts of energy trying to keep others comfortable, happy, calm. We modulate our voices so as not to upset anyone. We hide our true thoughts to avoid conflict. We suppress our authentic reactions to prevent others from feeling bad. We have become emotional caretakers, constantly monitoring the inner weather of those around us and adjusting ourselves accordingly. But when you choose yourself, you recognize that this is not kindness. This is a form of control disguised as care. When you constantly manage others' emotions by hiding your own truth, you prevent them from learning to manage their own inner states. You keep them dependent on external circumstances being arranged just so in order for them to feel all right. Moreover, you exhaust yourself in this impossible task. You cannot control how others feel, no matter how carefully you curate your words and actions. Their emotional responses arise from their own inner landscape, their own unresolved conflicts, their own relationship to themselves. By taking responsibility for their feelings, you abandon responsibility for your own. I remember a man who came to me, worn down by years of trying to keep his wife happy. He had learned to read her moods like a barometer, adjusting his behavior constantly to maintain her emotional equilibrium. He never expressed disagreement, never shared his own concerns, never asked for what he needed. And still, she was often unhappy, often critical, often demanding more accommodation from him. When he finally began to choose himself, when he started expressing his authentic thoughts and feelings regardless of her reactions, she was initially furious. She accused him of not caring about her, of being cruel and selfish. But something interesting happened over time. She began to develop her own inner resources for managing her emotions. She stopped expecting him to be responsible for her happiness and started taking responsibility for her own inner state. This is what I mean when I say that choosing yourself actually serves others, even when they cannot see it initially. When you stop managing their emotions, you force them to develop their own. Emotional maturity. When you stop carrying their burdens, you allow them to discover their own strength. When you stop living their unlived life for them, you create space for them to live it themselves. But this requires tremendous courage, because there will be a period of turbulence. Others may become angry, hurt, confused, when you stop playing the roles they have assigned to you. They may try to guilt you back into compliance. They may threaten to withdraw their love or approval. They may tell you that you are being heartless, uncaring, wrong. This is the test. This is where most people falter and return to their old patterns of self-abandonment. They cannot bear the discomfort of disappointing others, even when those others are asking them to betray themselves. They choose temporary peace over lasting authenticity, momentary approval over genuine self-respect. But if you can weather this storm, if you can remain centered in your own truth while others react to it, something remarkable happens. The relationships that were built on false foundations may crumble, yes, but those that survive this transformation become deeper, more honest, more genuinely loving than they ever were before. And new relationships enter your life, connections with people who appreciate authenticity rather than performance, who value honesty over agreeableness, who can meet you in your truth rather than requiring you to diminish it for their comfort. The sixth change that occurs when you choose yourself is a shift in how you experience time itself. When you are living inauthentically, when you are constantly performing roles that do not fit your true nature, time feels heavy, sluggish, endless. Days drag by without meaning. You feel as though you are moving through thick water, every action requiring tremendous effort because it goes against your natural grain. But when you align with your authentic self, time takes on a different quality. Hours pass like minutes when you are engaged in activities that express your true nature. You find yourself absorbed in pursuits that feed your soul rather than drain it. You discover that you have energy you never knew existed because you are no longer working against yourself. This is not to say that authentic living eliminates all difficulty or struggle, but there is a difference between the struggle that comes from pursuing something meaningful and the exhaustion that comes from forcing yourself to care about things that hold no genuine significance for you. I've observed that many people spend their days in a kind of temporal prison, going through motions that feel mechanical, automatic, dead. They complain of boredom, of life feeling repetitive and meaningless. But this is not because life itself is boring. It is because they have not yet discovered who they truly are beneath all the roles they have been playing. When you choose yourself, when you begin to live from your authentic center, life becomes vivid again. Colors seem brighter because you are seeing through your own eyes rather than through the filter of others' expectations. Experiences become more intense because you are fully present to them rather than partially distracted by the effort of maintaining a false persona. You begin to understand that much of what you thought was depression or anxiety or restlessness was actually your soul's rebellion against a life that did not fit. The psyche knows when we are living lies, even when the conscious mind has convinced itself otherwise. It sends us symptoms, dreams, inexplicable longings, all in an effort to call us back to ourselves. But when we heed this call, when we finally choose to honor what is deepest and truest within us, these symptoms often resolve themselves, not because our external circumstances have necessarily changed, but because we are no longer at war with ourselves. The energy that was previously consumed in internal conflict becomes available for creative expression, genuine relationship, meaningful work. This is what I have come to understand about the nature of psychological healing. We cannot cure ourselves by analyzing our symptoms endlessly or by trying to adjust ourselves to fit into situations that fundamentally contradict our nature. True healing comes when we have the courage to become who we actually are rather than who we think we should be. And this choice, this commitment to authenticity, it must be renewed daily. It is not a destination we arrive at once and then inhabit forever. It is a practice, a way of being that requires constant vigilance and constant courage. Because the forces that pull us away from ourselves, they do not disappear. The need for approval, the fear of rejection, the desire to fit in, these are powerful currents that will continue to exert their influence throughout our lives. But once you have tasted the freedom that comes from choosing yourself, Once you have experienced what it feels like to live in alignment with your deepest truth, you can never fully return to unconsciousness. You may stumble, you may find yourself slipping back into old patterns, but there will always be something within you that remembers what authenticity feels like, something that calls you back home to yourself. This remembering, this return to your essential self, it transforms not only how you move through the world, but how the world moves through you. And here I must speak of something that few dare to acknowledge, something I have witnessed in the deepest recesses of the human psyche. When you choose yourself authentically, you begin to attract what I can only describe as synchronicities. Events align in ways that seem impossible, as if the universe itself conspires to support your authentic path. I do not speak of magic or supernatural intervention. I speak of something far more profound and far more real. When you are living in alignment with your deepest nature, when you have stopped forcing yourself into shapes that do not fit, you become permeable to possibilities that were always there but which you could not perceive through the fog of your false self. Let me give you an example from my own experience. For years, I followed the prescribed path of my profession, accepting what others deemed important, pursuing recognition in fields that felt foreign to my soul. And during this time, life felt like swimming against a powerful current. Opportunities seemed scarce, connections felt forced, progress required tremendous effort for minimal results. But the moment I began to honor my true interests, to follow the questions that genuinely fascinated me, rather than those that would bring approval, everything shifted. The right books appeared at the right moments. Conversations revealed insights that had eluded me for years. Patients arrived who needed exactly what I had learned to offer. It was as if by becoming myself, I had tuned into a frequency that was always broadcasting, but which I had been too distracted to receive. This is not wishful thinking or self-deception. This is the natural result of aligning your conscious intentions with your unconscious wisdom. When you stop fighting yourself, when you cease the exhausting work of maintaining a false persona, enormous amounts of energy are freed up. Energy that can now be directed toward genuine creation, authentic relationship, meaningful work. Moreover, when you are being truly yourself, you begin to see clearly. The fog of self-deception lifts, and you can perceive opportunities, connections, and possibilities that were invisible when you were trapped in the prison of others' expectations. It is not that the world changes, but that your capacity to see and respond to what is actually there expands dramatically. I have watched this phenomenon countless times in my work with patients. The woman who finally admitted she was a painter rather than the accountant her family expected her to be suddenly found herself surrounded by artistic opportunities she had never noticed before. The man who chose to honor his need for solitude rather than forcing himself into social situations that drained him discovered work that allowed him to contribute meaningfully while respecting his natural temperament. But here is what I find most remarkable about this process. The seventh transformation that occurs when you choose yourself is perhaps the most mysterious of all. You begin to serve life itself in ways you never could when you were serving the expectations of others. When you are living authentically, when you have aligned with your deepest nature, you become a channel for something larger than your individual will. I do not mean to sound mystical, though I suppose there is something mystical about the deepest truths of human existence. What I mean is this: when you are no longer consumed with maintaining a false self, when you are no longer exhausting yourself, trying to be someone you are not, you become available to serve purposes that extend beyond your personal agenda. The artist who finally chooses to create from their authentic vision rather than what they think will sell often produces work that touches something universal in human experience. The teacher who abandons the curriculum that feels dead to them and begins teaching from their genuine passion often awakens something profound in their students. The parent who stops trying to be the perfect mother or father and simply shows up as themselves often provides exactly what their children need most. This is the great paradox I have discovered in my years of studying the human psyche. The more fully you become yourself, the more you serve the whole, the more you honor your individual nature, the more you contribute to the collective. It is as if by diving deeply into your own authentic being, you touch something that belongs not just to you, but to all humanity. I think of the great artists, the profound thinkers, the spiritual teachers who have moved civilization forward. Without exception, they were individuals who had the courage to be themselves completely, often in the face of tremendous opposition. They did not try to please everyone or conform to existing standards. They followed their own inner compass, and in doing so, they discovered treasures that enriched all of us. This is what I mean when I say that choosing yourself is not selfish. True selfishness would be remaining small, staying false, continuing to live a lie that serves no one, not even yourself. When you choose authenticity, when you have the courage to become who you truly are, you offer the world something it desperately needs, a genuine human being. The world is full of copies, imitations, people trying to be someone else. What it lacks is originals, individuals who have done the difficult work of discovering and expressing their unique essence. When you choose yourself, you add something to the world that has never existed before and will never exist again in quite the same way. But this brings us to perhaps the most challenging aspect of choosing yourself. You must be willing to be alone with your choices, not necessarily physically alone, though periods of solitude are often necessary for authentic development, but alone in the sense that ultimately you cannot look to others to validate your path or confirm your decisions. When you are living authentically, you are pioneering. You are walking a path that no one else can walk for you, making choices that no one else can make, discovering truths that no one else can discover in quite the same way. This requires tremendous courage because there are no guarantees, no maps, no experts who can tell you definitively whether you are going in the right direction. The only compass you have is your own inner sense of rightness, your own feeling of alignment or misalignment with your deeper nature. And this compass, while ultimately reliable, can be difficult to read, especially when you are just learning to trust it after years of ignoring its guidance. I remember periods in my own life when I felt completely lost, when I had abandoned the familiar landmarks of conventional success but had not yet found my own true north. These were dark times, filled with doubt and uncertainty. There were moments when I wondered if I had made a terrible mistake, if I should return to the safety of conformity and accepted paths. But I have learned that this darkness, this uncertainty, this sense of being lost, is not a sign that you are going wrong. It is a sign that you are going deeper. When you choose yourself, you must pass through what I call the dark night of authenticity. You must face the terror of not knowing who you are when you stop being who others expect you to be. This is why so many people never make this journey. The uncertainty is too frightening, the loneliness too overwhelming, the risk of discovering that you are not who you thought you were too threatening. It is easier to remain in the familiar prison of false identity than to venture into the unknown territory of authentic selfhood. But for those who have the courage to continue, who can tolerate the darkness and uncertainty long enough for their true nature to emerge, The rewards are beyond description. You discover not only who you are, but who you have always been beneath the layers of conditioning and expectation. You find not emptiness but fullness, not nothing but everything that matters most. The eighth transformation that occurs when you choose yourself is perhaps the most beautiful of all. You begin to love differently, not with the desperate need that masquerades as love, not with the possessiveness that seeks to control others for your own emotional security, but with the freedom that comes from being complete in yourself. When you are no longer looking to others to fill the empty spaces within you, when you are no longer depending on them to validate your worth or confirm your existence, you can love them for who they are rather than for what they can give you. This is the difference between love and need, between genuine affection and emotional addiction. I have observed that most of what we call love is actually need disguised. We need others to make us feel valuable, to make us feel complete, to make us feel less alone. We need them to play certain roles in the drama of our lives, to fulfill certain functions in the economy of our emotional survival. And when they fail to meet these needs, when they refuse to play their assigned parts, we feel betrayed, abandoned, unloved. But when you choose yourself, when you have found your way back to your own center, this desperate quality disappears from your relationships. You can appreciate others without needing to possess them. You can enjoy their company without requiring their constant presence. You can care deeply about their well-being without feeling responsible for their choices. This transformation in how you love extends to your relationship with yourself as well. When you are living authentically, you develop what I can only describe as a genuine friendship with your own being. You stop being your own harshest critic and become your own most compassionate companion. You learn to speak to yourself with the same kindness you would offer a dear friend facing difficulty. This self-compassion is not self-indulgence or weakness. It is the foundation of all genuine strength. When you are harsh and critical with yourself, when you are constantly judging and condemning your thoughts, feelings, and actions, you create an internal environment of fear and tension. It becomes impossible to access your deeper wisdom, your natural creativity, your authentic voice. But when you treat yourself with respect and understanding, when you can acknowledge your mistakes without destroying yourself with shame, when you can face your limitations without losing sight of your possibilities, you create space for genuine growth and transformation. I think of the relationship between a gardener and their garden. A wise gardener does not curse the soil for needing nutrients or condemn the plants for growing slowly. They understand that growth requires patience, that each season has its purpose, that even apparent setbacks often serve the larger process of development. When you choose yourself, you become the gardener of your own being. You learn to work with your nature rather than against it. You provide yourself with the conditions you need to flourish rather than forcing yourself to bloom in environments that cannot sustain your authentic growth. This may mean leaving relationships that require you to be less than you are. It may mean changing careers that demand you to betray your values. It may mean disappointing family members who have invested in keeping you small. These choices are never easy, but they become necessary when you understand that the alternative is a slow death of the soul. The ninth and perhaps most profound transformation that occurs when you choose yourself is a shift in your relationship to death itself. Not physical death, though that too may be faced with greater equanimity, but the death of the false self, the death of illusions, the death of everything that you are not. When you are living inauthentically, you are already dead in the ways that matter most. You are alive biologically but dead spiritually, moving through the world but not truly inhabiting it, breathing but not fully living. The choice to be yourself requires you to let this false life die. And this can feel terrifying because it is the only life you have known. But what I have discovered, both in my own experience and in my work with countless others, is that this death is not an ending, but a beginning. When you allow the false self to die, when you stop investing your energy in maintaining an identity that was never truly yours, space is created for your authentic self to be born. This is why the process of choosing yourself often feels like dying and being reborn simultaneously. You are dying to who you thought you should be and being born into who you actually are. You are releasing everything that you have accumulated that does not belong to your true nature and discovering everything that has always been waiting within you. I want to speak now of something that may sound strange, but which I have found to be absolutely true. When you choose yourself completely, when you align with your deepest authentic nature, you begin to experience what I can only call a reunion with life itself. You feel connected not just to other human beings, but to the trees, the sky, the changing seasons, the fundamental rhythms of existence. This is not poetry or sentiment. This is a real psychological phenomenon that occurs when the barriers between your authentic self and the world begin to dissolve. When you are no longer hiding behind masks, when you are no longer defending against life, you become permeable to the beauty and mystery that surrounds you always, but which most people are too defended to perceive. You begin to understand that your individual authenticity is not separate from the authenticity of nature itself. The same force that drives the trees to reach toward light, that compels the rivers to flow toward the sea, that moves the planets in their courses, this same force is what calls you toward your true self. When you choose to honor this calling, you align yourself with the fundamental creative principle of existence. This alignment brings with it a sense of rightness, of being in the right place at the right time, of participating in something infinitely larger than your individual concerns. It is as if by becoming fully yourself, you have found your proper place in the great symphony of existence. You are no longer fighting the music, but playing your unique part in harmony with the whole. The 10th and final transformation I will speak of today is perhaps the most practical and yet the most revolutionary. When you choose yourself, you develop what I call divine discernment. You become extraordinarily skilled at distinguishing between what serves your authentic development and what does not, between what deserves your energy and what would waste it, between what calls forth your highest self and what would diminish it. This discernment operates at every level of existence. You become able to sense immediately whether a person, a situation, an opportunity, or an invitation will nourish your authentic growth or drain your vital energy. You develop an almost supernatural ability to recognize what belongs in your life and what does not. This is not judgment in the ordinary sense. You are not condemning what does not serve you or declaring it wrong or evil. You are simply recognizing what fits your nature and what does not, what supports your authentic path and what would lead you astray. It is like developing perfect pitch for your own soul's music. With this discernment comes tremendous freedom and tremendous responsibility. Freedom because you no longer waste time and energy on pursuits that do not truly matter to you. Responsibility because you can no longer claim ignorance about what serves your highest good and what does not. Every choice becomes conscious. Every decision carries weight. I have found that people who develop this level of discernment often appear to others to live charmed lives. Opportunities seem to flow to them naturally. They seem to avoid many of the pitfalls that trap others. They appear to have luck or special favor from life itself. But this is not luck. This is the natural result of learning to distinguish between what is authentic and what is false, what is life-giving and what is life-draining, what deserves your precious energy and what would squander it. When you become skilled at making these distinctions, when you have the courage to act on them consistently, life begins to support you in ways that seem miraculous but are actually quite logical. You see, life itself has an investment in your authenticity. The universe has spent billions of years creating you, this unique configuration of consciousness that has never existed before and will never exist again. When you honor this uniqueness, when you choose to express your authentic nature fully, you are cooperating with the deepest creative forces of existence itself. And these forces in turn begin to cooperate with you. Doors open that you never even knew existed. Resources appear when you need them most. The right people enter your life at precisely the right moments. What seemed impossible when you were fighting against your nature becomes not only possible but inevitable when you align with it. This is what I mean when I say that everything changes when you choose yourself, not just your external circumstances, though those often transform dramatically, not just your relationships, though they become deeper and more authentic, not just your work, though it becomes more meaningful and fulfilling. Everything changes because you change. And when you change at the deepest level, when you align with your most authentic self, the entire universe shifts to accommodate this new version of you. You discover that you are not a victim of circumstance, but a co-creator of reality itself. You realize that by becoming who you truly are, you participate in the ongoing creation of the world. This is the great secret that most people never discover. This is the treasure that lies hidden beneath all the fear and conditioning and false identity. This is what waits for you when you finally have the courage to choose yourself completely, authentically, without reservation or apology. The moment you make this choice, the moment you decide to honor what is deepest and truest within you, everything begins to change. And it never stops changing, never stops unfolding, never stops revealing new depths and possibilities. Because choosing yourself is not a destination, but a way of being, not a problem to be solved, but a mystery to be lived. And in living this mystery fully, in choosing yourself completely, you discover something that no amount of external achievement or approval could ever provide. You discover what it means to be truly alive. It means to be truly alive. You discover that you have been living not one life, but many lives simultaneously. The life others see, the life you present to the world, the life you think you should be living, and beneath it all, the life that has been waiting patiently for you to recognize it, to claim it, to finally allow it to breathe. This multiplicity of selves is perhaps the greatest tragedy of human existence. We fragment ourselves so completely that we forget there was ever a wholeness to be recovered. We scatter our energy across so many false identities that we have no strength left for the one that truly matters. We become strangers in our own house, visitors in our own skin. I have spent countless hours sitting with people who have achieved everything they thought they wanted, yet feel empty inside. They have the career, the marriage, the children, the respect of their peers. They have checked every box that society told them would bring happiness. And yet they come to me with tears in their eyes, saying, I feel like I am disappearing. I feel like I am becoming less and less myself with each passing day. This is the natural consequence of choosing everyone but yourself for too long. The authentic self does not simply wait forever. If ignored long enough, if betrayed too consistently, It begins to withdraw its energy from your conscious life. You find yourself going through the motions but feeling nothing. You smile, but the smile feels painted on. You speak, but the words feel hollow. You move through your days like a ghost haunting your own existence. But here is what I have learned about the nature of the soul. It is remarkably resilient. Even after years of neglect, even after decades of abandonment, it retains its essential vitality. The moment you turn toward it with genuine attention, the moment you begin to listen to its voice again, it responds like a flower that has been waiting through a long winter for the first touch of spring sun. This responsiveness of the authentic self to recognition and care is one of the most beautiful things I have witnessed in human beings. No matter how far they have strayed from themselves, no matter how completely they have lost contact with their true nature, there remains within them this spark of authentic life that can be rekindled. I think of a patient I worked with many years ago, a man who had spent 40 years building a business empire while slowly dying inside. He had become everything his father wanted him to be, achieved every goal his society valued, accumulated wealth and power beyond most people's dreams. But when he sat in my office, he looked like a man who had been hollowed out from within. "I have everything," he said, "and I am nothing. I have succeeded at everything except being myself." The journey back to himself was not easy. It required him to face the terror of disappointing those who had invested in his false identity. It demanded that he risk everything he had built on the foundation of others' expectations. It asked him to become a beginner again, to admit that despite all his worldly success, he was still learning the most basic lesson of human existence: how to be himself. But as he began this work, as he started to choose his own authentic responses over the programmed reactions he had carried for decades, something extraordinary happened. His business, which he had built through force of will and social obligation, began to transform. Instead of being a prison that drained his life force, it became a vehicle for expressing his genuine gifts and values. This is what I mean when I say that choosing yourself does not require you to abandon everything you have built. It requires you to transform it from within. When you align your external life with your internal truth, when you stop performing roles and start expressing your authentic nature, everything you touch becomes infused with new life, new meaning, new possibility. The 11th transformation that occurs when you choose yourself is perhaps the most mysterious of all. You begin to dream differently, not just the dreams that come in sleep, though those too may shift dramatically, but the dreams you dare to have while awake, the possibilities you allow yourself to imagine, the futures you permit yourself to envision. When you are living inauthentically, your dreams tend to be limited by what others consider realistic or appropriate. You dream small dreams that fit within the boundaries of accepted possibility. You imagine futures that others can understand and approve of. Your vision is constrained by the collective agreement about what is possible for someone like you. But when you choose yourself, when you align with your authentic nature, something opens up within you. You begin to sense possibilities that you could never perceive when you were trapped in the prison of others' expectations. You start to dream dreams that seem to come from some deeper source, visions that feel both utterly personal and somehow larger than your individual will. I have noticed that people who are living authentically often describe experiences of inspiration that feel like something moving through them rather than something they are creating. They speak of ideas that arrive fully formed, of solutions that appear in moments of quiet receptivity, of creative impulses that seem to emerge from a source beyond their conscious control. So here we are at the end of our journey together, and yet I sense this is truly where your real journey begins, for everything I have shared with you today can be reduced to one simple truth that each soul must discover for itself. You are the only person you will spend your entire life with, and until you choose to befriend that person, to honor that person, to become that person fully, you will remain a stranger in your own existence. The choice to be yourself is not made once but renewed each morning when you wake. It is not a destination you arrive at, but a path you walk, step by conscious step, back to the home you never truly left but simply forgot how to inhabit. And in making this choice, in choosing yourself above all the voices that would diminish you, you offer the world something it desperately needs: one more human being who has remembered what it means to be authentically, courageously, completely alive.